You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Well, good morning. Today we have a fantastic guest on the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners. The Be Better Off Show is all about bringing guests to our friends and clients who can help us be healthier, wealthier, and wiser. And today I'm so excited to have Peter Kreeft, the author of more than 80 books, a philosophy professor, still going, I suspect, for an interesting conversation on his long and varied life and career. And really, I guess I want to center that conversation around the good life, Peter. Peter, all the way from Boston, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. It's morning for you. It's afternoon for me.
Absolutely. Why don't I start at the beginning and ask you, as a boy, where did you grow up? And then where did you go to college? And how did you come to the professional career that you ended up in?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey. We think of New York City as our very large suburb to the east. A little town called Haledon, New Jersey, the state that Woody Allen makes so many jokes about. He says in one of his movies, I'm an atheist, thank God, but I could believe on a beautiful day like this that there is a divine mind taking care of every aspect of the known universe everywhere, except, of course, in certain areas of northern New Jersey. I went to Calvin College in Michigan. I grew up as a Calvinist, became a Catholic at age 21. Have been in a number of places, Japan, Scandinavia, Canada, a very strange place. But maybe the strangest one of all is here in the States. And Boston is my home. I'm a Red Sox fan, alas. What else do you want to know?
So what did you study at college, and how did you ultimately end up an author and a philosophy professor?
Well, I was an English major. I have a very unusual brain. I'm very bad at math, and I'm very good at English. And any poem that I love, I remember automatically. And I can't even remember telephone numbers. But as an English major, I kept asking philosophical questions about things I was reading. And my first philosophy course was taught by someone who was probably certifiably insane. A number of philosophers are. So that turned me off from philosophy, but the department chairman gave me a second chance, and he taught one of the best courses I ever had. So we usually, I think, choose our vocations by our mentors. I want to be like him. So a man named William Harry Jalma. There's about 50 people in the world today who are teaching philosophy because of Jalma. So I became a philosophy major and fell in love with the great classics, especially Thomas Aquinas. I became a Thomist long before I became a Catholic. And went to Yale for a year. Went to Fordham in New York to get more Thomism. Been teaching at Boston College since 1965. Rather a long time. That was the Jurassic Age, I think. There were dinosaurs wandering around in our backyard about then. And I still don't understand the concept of retirement, so I'm still teaching full time and writing a lot of books.
So that's amazing. So you've had a career at Boston College for more than 50 years. I guess, you've shared something very interesting there. I'd like to ask you, in terms of you choose your vocation, your profession often by your mentors. How important have these mentors been to you?
Very important. William Harry Jalma was a kind of a Socrates figure. He never wrote a book, but he made us answer questions. I still remember with joy something that at the time was far from joyful. He gave us an assignment. We had a class of 12 philosophy majors, all seniors, I think. And we had to read Hume's Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Hume is probably the most persuasive skeptic in the history of human thought. And he said, you won't like his conclusion, but he doesn't seem to make any mistakes. Find his mistake. Why do you want to be anything other than a skeptic after reading Hume? And the 12 of us were together over either Easter or Thanksgiving vacation. We read the book and we tried to find a fallacy in the argument. We couldn't. We were very, very disturbed. We came back to class and we said, Professor, we can't find his mistake. Tell us, where did he make his mistake? He refused. He said, you know your logic. There must be either an ambiguous term or a false premise or a logical fallacy somewhere. Go back and read the thing again. And we did. And we taught ourselves. His
And
not
what did you
teaching
find?
us.
What did you find over that reading?
Well, the general principle was that you don't let other people do your thinking for you. You endure the suffering of not knowing in order to get to knowing. You start with doubt, and then you might end with certainty. But if you start with an easy certainty, you'll probably end with doubt.
Yeah, very interesting. So you get to Boston College. What was your first role there? Had you then done a master's or a PhD, and did you start as a junior faculty member?
Actually, I taught for 3 years at Villanova in Philadelphia before Boston College, and my role there was mainly to teach logic. While I was working on my PhD, I was teaching there, and I got my PhD in 1965, the first year I came to Boston College. I always wanted to live in Boston, beautiful city. Philadelphia is too, but Boston College is a very good college. It's academically good, and if you want a good Catholic education, you can get it. And if you want to get totally lost and fall between the cracks, you can do that too. And if you want to learn typical modern heresies, you can do that too. It's sort of all things to all people.
Yeah, very interesting. And so,
And it's always had a very good philosophy department. When I first came there, the chairman said, we're expanding the department. We had a rather narrow curriculum, so please tell us what you want to teach. So I said, oh, well, here are my favorite philosophers: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, Kierkegaard, Heidegger. He said, well, we have experts on all of those. You're not an expert yet. What do you want to teach? I said, well, I just took a course at Yale in Buddhism, and I learned almost nothing. The professor was extremely eccentric, but I'm interested in the question of world religions. He said, good. Nobody here knows anything about that at all. You're the reading expert. And I said, honestly, I'm not capable of teaching that course until I do a lot more work. He said, fine, I'll get a Danforth for you. What? He said, I'll go to Washington. I've got friends. You've got good credentials. I'll get a Danforth for you. Send you over to Japan and interview the mystics and the gurus, and then come back and teach it. Well, that's what happened.
fantastic. So as a young person, you found an innovative niche. What did you learn on that trip to Japan in speaking to the Buddhist Masters?
Well, two things. Number one, that they had a kind of, how shall I put it, not a talent, just a piece, perception, a mental perception that I didn't have. They instantly saw through me. One of them, for instance, said, have you published anything? I said, not yet. He said, how long have you taught philosophy? I said, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And he said, I've been talking to you for just 30 minutes, and I know something about the history of philosophy, but I know nothing about you, but I know who your favorite philosopher is. I said, how do you know that? He said, just by talking with you. I said, who's my favorite philosopher? He said, Socrates. I said, how did you know that? And he said, well, you're always talking from two places, from down here and from up there. One half of you is sitting on the ceiling watching the other half of you and asking you questions. That's Socrates. So they're very perceptive, and their mind is very, very sharp, and I have great respect for the Buddhists. However, when you get them involved with philosophy questions, is there a substantial self? How do you know there is no God? And what is the meaning of life? You find that they are little children. They're not very good philosophers at all. They're very good mystics and very bad philosophers.
It's very interesting. So you come back as an early teacher. I guess what is, what makes a great teacher? Somebody that can persist and enjoy 50 years in a profession?
I don't know. I'd have to have the experience of being one in order to know what it is. I think I know what it is to be a good teacher. You have to fall in love with two things, your subject and your students. If you don't care about communicating your subject to your students, you're all alone with yourself. And if you don't care about your subject, then you're pandering to people and giving them things that aren't very worthwhile. So I think you have to have, obviously, a good head, but you also have to have a good heart. If you don't love both your students and your subject, you're not a good teacher.
It's amazing. And so for you, where did that, that real care for people and that love of your subject come from?
I know the answer to that question. It didn't come from me. That came from God. The human heart is not designed at Harvard or Hollywood. It's designed in heaven.
And how did you come to that certainty? How did you come to your faith and your sort of your, I guess, belief that's driven your work?
For some people, faith is an effort, a good faith effort. For me, doubt is an effort. I do make a good faith effort. I enter into the mind of atheists sympathetically, and I try to understand them. But faith was never that difficult to me. There's been trials and temptations and problems, of course. But even as a little kid, I remember going to Sunday school and learning a simple biblical Protestant evangelical faith. And it was kind of confusing. And I remember saying to my father once, I must have been about 7 years old. I remember the exact time and place. My father was an elder in the church. He was a very good man, a very wise man, and a very good amateur theologian. I said, Dad, all this stuff that I learned in Sunday school, I don't understand it all. It's interesting, but I don't get it. But if I'm right, it really only comes down to one thing, right? He said, no, it's many things, not one thing. What do you mean? I said, well, here's what God wants of us. He just wants us to say, I love you. What do you want me to do? And then he'll tell you, and then you do it. And I still remember my father's look. He said, you know, son, that's absolutely right. It's all been downhill since then. It's been more complicated, but that was, you know, what is it to be a saint? To fall in love with God's will.
And so then was that a realization through then your study as you proceeded through your higher education? Often you see people become more jaundiced and less and less capable of belief as they get more letters after their name.
That often happens. That often happens. And I had temptations to be very arrogant and proud and rationalistic and know it all, but knew that that was a temptation and that was stupid. I always remembered Socrates' lesson one. There's only two kinds of people in the world. There's fools who think that they're wise, and there are the wise who know that they're fools. So I wanted to be wise, so I had to know that I'm a fool. I think the greatest thing Thomas Aquinas, who is my candidate for the most brilliant thinker who ever lived, the most brilliant thing he said was three words. Shortly before he died, according to his confessor, testifying under oath, he did not finish the Summa Theologica. 4,000-page masterpiece is unfinished, and he refused to write anything. And they asked him why. And he said, well, because what I have seen makes all that I've written into nothing but straw. And he testifies that he saw a few weeks before Thomas's death, Thomas in the monastery on the floor of the chapel in the middle of the night, alone, conversing with Christ, who spoke to him from the crucifix. And Christ said, Thomas, my son, you have written very well of me. What will you have as your reward? Thomas answered three words, only yourself, Lord. That was the most eloquent thing he ever said.
So you came to know, you know, I guess as a young person, Peter, I lost a job and I didn't know what to do. So I wrote to 80 prominent Australians and asked them to speak to me about what they'd learned in their life. And that's been for more than 25 years now, a four-book project every 7 years. And
That's got a great sense of humor, doesn't he?
Yeah.
You found your vocation by losing one.
Correct. Exactly right. And what I found was by asking people, meeting people like in this format, I've learned so much, which is so interesting. But I've often sort of reflected to people that in reading over 3,000 books and interviewing hundreds of people, that you can have mentors. Often dead mentors are the best, because we've got so much access to information today, that even if you're very isolated and you don't grow up in great circumstances, that you can find these people who can inspire you to a better understanding, a deeper understanding, and a better life. I sense in just talking to you that people like Socrates and Aquinas have been, other than your living mentors, these great figures in your life that have inspired and encouraged you.
Yes, and you don't have to agree with their philosophy in order to learn from them and to be inspired by their example. Probably the most sheerly intelligent human being I ever met in my life was one of my professors at Yale, Brand Blanchard, who was a disciple of Hegel, of all people. And Hegel's a genius, but a very eccentric genius, and his philosophy has very little to do with life, but it's brilliant. And he was rather like Hegel, very brilliant, but also very modest. And he would admit when he was wrong, and when a student corrected him. There were 24 of us, all of us philosophy majors who were quite bright. I was probably the most naive and undereducated person there. And we all entered his course thinking that Hegel was a fool, and we all exited his course thinking that Hegel was a genius. We still disagreed with Hegel, but he presented the argument so perfectly that we learned to just overcome our personal prejudices and trust this guy.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So in teaching your, this love you have for your students, what's your aim for a student who enters one of your classes?
What's my aim?
Yeah, like what? How do you know that you've done your job well?
Well, I don't, because sometimes students perform very badly on tests, but you can see that they're thinking and they've fallen in love with philosophy. And sometimes they perform quite well on the tests, and you suspect that they're going in the wrong direction. They're relying too much on second things than first things. So you don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So you can just hope.
Everything about us is fallible, including our intuitive take on other people.
Yeah. Now, in writing more than 80 books, how did you come to writing, and what inspired you to I guess to make the effort to try and put your thoughts down in a coherent format in a book?
I was afraid you'd ask me that question, and my only answer is I really don't know.
Yeah.
People ask me how it happened. What was the process? What was the method? How do you do it? And I say, I don't know.
Yeah.
If there's any secret, it's not asking that question, not worrying about the question of method and technique. If I were in technology, that would flunk me out entirely, because that technology is almost all technique. Here is an easier way of doing something that used to be hard or expensive. But many philosophers are worried about methodology, kind of intellectual technology. I can't get interested in that question. I just do it.
Yeah,
I don't know how I do it. I don't care how I do it.
So Peter, there's a great quote where somebody asked Hemingway, how tell me, how do you become a writer? And he said to them, apparently, you write.
Yes, yes, yes. The Red Queen says to Alice in Alice in Wonderland, tell me your story. And Alice says, I don't know how to tell a story. The Red Queen says, why, it's as simple as pie, my child. You just must remember three things. To tell a story, you begin at the beginning, you proceed until you come to the end, and then you stop.
Yes, very good.
That's the most complex method, I admit.
So as you get older, what are the things when you look back, if you were talking to your younger self, what would you say are the things around a good life that a young person would benefit most from remembering?
That the challenges and the difficulties and the sufferings and the sacrifices that you are called upon to make will educate you more than anything else in the world. That to be a good philosopher, is to know what it is to be a good human being. And it's much more difficult to be a good human being if you are a yuppie, and if you can control your life, and if you're living in a bubble, and if you don't have a large family, and if you don't have many tragedies and problems. Nothing can teach you more about the meaning of life than family, especially children.
And what have you learned from your children?
Well, I've learned who I am. Uh, I've learned that expectations are foolish, that pre-programming people is like treating computers as if they were persons. It's a totally different world. People have to be handled by love and care and intuition and joy, whereas things have to be handled with reason and power and control and prediction.
Yeah, very interesting. How many children do you have?
4.
And how long have you been married?
Let's see, 55 years.
So,
Oh, 57 years.
for our audience, one of the things that I've always been fascinated by, many years ago, I sat at a dinner that I was to speak at, and there were 5 couples I sat with, all who had been married for more than 60 years. And I never forget that. And after sitting there for 40 minutes, sort of having dinner, I was meant to be the after dinner speaker. I said to them, I feel very unqualified to say anything, but I've enjoyed learning from you so much. What makes a successful 57-year marriage?
You just do it. You decide to do it and you do it. That's what love is. It's not a planning. It's not a gimmick, a theory, a method, a technique. It's not a feeling. It's not an emotion. It's a work. You do it. You work at it. Freud, who was rather wise as a psychologist until he came to morality and religion, Freud says the 2 most important things in life are love and work. They have to go together. And that's very wise. Love is a work.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Whereas today, so often it's characterized as a feeling. And feelings
well, that means that Jesus is a fool, because he commands us to love. And for me to command you to have loving feelings towards me makes me a fool.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Feeling.
So your faith, you were raised a Calvinist, you became a Catholic, you certainly have written extensively on your Christianity. What is it, how do you think about your beliefs as informing a good life, and how did you rationally come to that position?
Well, everyone's beliefs have an immense causal power over how they live. You at least try to live according to your beliefs. And if you believe that life is meaningless, if you're a nihilist, you're going to live in a very different way than you believe that it's meaningful. And if you believe that the meaning of life is simply to die with the most toys, then you're going to live in a very different way than if you believe that the meaning of life is to expand your loves. And if you believe that there is at the heart of reality a personal God, then you're going to respect persons as made in his image. Otherwise, you're just going to say, well, persons are equal to me, and I'll respect them only as I respect myself. So no matter what philosophy or religion or answer to the question, what is the meaning of life you have, it's going to make the biggest difference that it could possibly make.
So for you,
everybody's got some absolute, some God, some greatest good.
Yeah, that's
the real God is a false one.
Very...
is impossible. You can and should be neutral as a method, especially when you're doing science. But no person's heart is neutral. Everybody's heart has some first love.
Has some
first love.
Yeah.
Augustine says, "You are what you love." One of his favorite sayings is, "My love is my gravity. Amor meus pondus meum." My love is my weight. My love moves me. I become what I love.
Which is very interesting. And so as a way of people being more grounded and more focused in the way they live, asking themselves where they spend their time and money as a reflection of what they love, and where they're really putting their effort is probably a worthwhile reflection.
Time is a crucial aspect of all our experience. Time is life, lifetime. So if you say to somebody, for instance, one of your children, well, I love you, but I'm not going to spend much time with you, but I'll make it quality time. You're fooling yourself. Quantity is terribly important.
It's very interesting. So, Peter, it is a modern saying, you know, I'm time poor. I'm going to spend quality time. I don't believe that, but
isn't it strange that that's a typically modern phenomenon? Because if there's anything that distinguishes our present culture from all past cultures, it's the spectacular success of technology.
Which was to create time.
All technology is time-saving devices.
Yeah.
How come the more time-saving devices we have, the less time we have rather than the more? Well, parents had more time for us than we have for our children. Our grandparents had more time for our parents than our parents had with us. We get less and less time as our lives become more complex and technological.
So that's interesting. Peter, being a scholar of Aquinas, you would be able to, I remember reading, you can probably share with me where I read this, but I remember reading Aquinas spoke about right order, and it struck me that most people talk about balance, and I always said there's no point being a saint today and a murderer tomorrow, and on average pretty good. That balance is a bit of in my view, a fallacy, and that what's really important is right order, spending your time and money and efforts and love and care on the thing that's most important, followed by the next most important thing, followed by the next most important thing. And I think that's really a challenge, to know what they are and to allocate your effort appropriately.
I totally agree. Balance is an image from a seesaw, and an image of equality, equal opportunities for both ends of the seesaw. You don't do that with good and evil. Evil gets 50%, good gets 50%. You don't even do that with goods. Paper clips are good, but they're not as good as medicines. And medicines are good, but they're not as good as love. There's a hierarchy. There's got to be a hierarchy. But hierarchy may not work in politics, but it works in life.
It's very interesting, because we've become so against hierarchy and so into equality that now I do feel like many of us can feel like our life is a bit of a seesaw, that we're a bit up and down, because we're not consistently allocating our time and effort to the things that matter the most.
Well, I think common sense says we should treat all people as equal because they're all God's children, but we should treat ideas as unequal and be quite critical about them. And I find that some of those people who say all ideas are equal don't really believe that all people are equal. They don't believe that. If they're not radical egalitarians, they're fools. They're the basket of the deplorable.
Yeah, correct. So you see this intolerance, and it's interesting. We're coming up to the big US election on the 3rd of November, and Trump promised to make America great again. He certainly has made America globally relevant, because even here in Australia, people are very invested in the outcome of this election, which is quite amazing, given that, you know, the US, last time I checked, was a separate country to Australia, although we're very dependent on the US for our security. You referenced that comment from Hillary Clinton, who, you know, is a noted modernist, would claim to regard all people as equal and that equality would be very important, but then refer to people as deplorables. Is it a belief, you know, if you see people as created in the image and likeness of a God or someone at least better than yourself, do you think that that's a better place to start in terms of trying to care for people?
It seems to me almost self-evident that that's true. Every political choice that we make is a compromise. There's no political perfection, there's no utopia. So many people are saying, and I am too, that when I go into the polls, no matter who I vote for, I'm going to have to hold my nose. I'm going to have to either vote for Joe Biden, who's a nice guy, but who sees nothing wrong with killing babies before they're born, or Donald Trump, who's pro-life, but is an idiot, a boomer, and an egotist and a bully. That's not that unusual. Jesus Christ never ran for president, so we never had a perfect candidate.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And so we looked
at when they came after Jesus to make him king, he acted like a scared little kid. He ran away. He wasn't running for president, he was running away from it.
Yeah, that's
my favorite quotation among all U.S. presidents is Harry Truman's remark. In this great land of ours, every little baby that's born an American citizen has an equal chance to someday find himself in the Oval Office. That's just the chance the poor little bastard has to take.
So it's interesting that as we eschew personal responsibility and an effort to perfect ourselves, that we look to politics to try and come up with solutions to perfect our societies. I think it's
the less religious we are, the more political we are. Yep. We make a new religion.
So we think that it's someone else's responsibility to perfect society. And I really do see that people taking personal responsibility for themselves and then reaching out to help other people perfect themselves is the strongest form of political action. How do we...
You can't give what you don't have. That's true.
That's right. So how do we encourage people? I believe that ideas lead to actions lead to habits, and habits are your destiny. So how do we encourage people to do what Henry Ford said was the hardest work, which is to think and to, I think you just described it as to endure the suffering of thinking, of working.
Mm-hmm.
How do we encourage that? How would you?
Well, once again, the question is not how. The question is whether. Do you embrace that whole package of common sense, personal development, and becoming a good person first before you help others to do it? How do you endure the pain of taking the log out of your own eye before you claim to take the splinter out of your neighbor's eye? I don't know how you do it. You just decide to do it.
And by example, encourage it.
Of my 4 children, they're all happy and they're all successful. One of them is handicapped verbally, and she's been in special schools all her life. She has taught me more than my other 3 children. She has taught me who I am. I'm handicapped in different ways. I never met a human being who didn't have a significant handicap somewhere and a significant talent somewhere else. And we all meet people who are talented and we emulate them, but we look on the handicapped as oh, you unfortunate people. No, they are profoundly important teachers. They show us the part of ourselves that we truly are, and we need to come to terms with.
Because it's easy to focus on the things we're good at and imagine that we are faultless, blameless, and somehow perfect.
Of course. We're all idiots.
So what do you do?
We're all intellectual idiots. But notice that Socrates and Jesus are very similar here. Socrates says we're all intellectual idiots unless we're humble enough to realize that we're idiots. And Jesus says we're all moral idiots because the self-righteous are the least righteous, not the most righteous. So Socrates says there's 2 kinds of people: fools who think they're wise and wise who think they're fools. And Jesus says there's 2 kinds of people. There's the saints who know that they're sinners, and there's sinners who think that they're saints.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So as you, I think you're 83 now, is that right?
Yeah.
As you enter this decade of your life, in Australia we play cricket, and to score 100 is a big deal. So as you're on your way to 100, what do you see? A lot of our audience are people that own businesses traditionally in Australia. people retire at 65. What do you see as the key to living well, post 65, post the kids being in the house, and in that next chapter of your life?
Almost everybody I know who's retired is bored, regrets being retired, wants to do something, maybe something a little easier than they did, maybe something more on an amateur level instead of a professional level. But retirement shouldn't be rest. It's not the meaning of leisure. Leisure is positive, creative activity. Many of us have a bucket list, and we're too busy to do the things we want to do in our bucket list. So retirement makes sense. You can do your bucket list, but it's for doing, not just for sitting back and relaxing. There's enough time to relax when you're in your coffin.
Yeah, very interesting. So you're still teaching, you're still writing?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the university, we have like a big issue in Australia of, I think, genuine ageism in the workforce. The university, what's their policy with people being 83 and continuing to teach?
We have tenure, and you can't fire us except for moral turpitude, or
And so when does
the
tenure
obvious
finish?
inability to do your thing. But I've never seen any teacher, no matter how old they are, who just hung on when they knew that they couldn't teach anymore.
So is it life tenure?
It is, yes. There's no mandatory retirement age.
And how long has that been the case, Peter?
I think forever.
Yeah, it's
I
amazing.
think tenure always brought that.
You know,
It's an unusual profession. You can't do most things, especially physical things, in your 80s, but you can teach. You can write.
Yeah, very interesting. So the accumulation of knowledge in some areas is really a cumulative process. And so as you get older, you should, with effort, become wiser. Not guaranteed, but possible.
But one part of wiser is more simple. So in a sense, it's shedding the accidents, the extra stuff. Probably the most profound writer in the Bible was John the Evangelist, and he lived to an old age. And his disciples complained in the last decade of his life that whenever he would talk about God, he would only talk about one thing. He'd only talk about love, nothing else. And one said, "Why do you only talk about love?" And he said, "Because there is nothing else. Everything else is related to that." But it took him a long time to see that.
So do you think as you get older,
Or Thomas Aquinas.
so Peter, are you saying that as you get older, if you get wiser, then as a process of shedding, you should be focusing on the things that matter more and doing potentially less of other things?
Well, how much you do depends on other factors, but what you love ought to be more solidified and more unified. How shall I put it? Less is more. Small is beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. And to the contrary of that, as you've written, more than 80 books, and the cumulative impact of all of the work you've done, I think, has grown over time. Does it give you some satisfaction to know that, people on the other side of the world have read your books? I think I first read one of your books more than 20 years ago. And when my son recently said to me, he's 15, Peter, and he announced at dinner, quite to my wife's horror, that I've decided that I'll go to Boston College in 3 years' time when I finish school and study philosophy. He'd found this out for himself on the internet. And I said, well, Tom, Tom, there's a really great teacher there. I think he's still there. I'll look him up. I read his books years ago, and I started pulling your books off my bookshelf and giving them to him. and it prompted me to reach out to you. And I said, look, Tom, I'll look him up. Look, Peter, he's still alive. He's still teaching there. It's a great college. He loves the US and Boston because that's where the Tea Party was, Dad, and all the action happened. But does it gratify you to know that the ripples that you've sent out into the world with your books have had such a profound impact all over the world?
Well, of course, it gratifies a farmer to see the crops come up. All he did was throw the seed. That's the easy part. God did the hard work. He's the source of life. But I don't start with that idea. I don't say, what does the world need? What do people need? How can I help them the best? I'll give them this. I don't start there. I start with, what am I good at? What do I love? What do I want to say? Does anybody want to hear it? Well, I don't care. One of the most enlightening statements I've ever heard is Mother Teresa's probably most famous quotation. God did not put us into this world to be successful. He put us here to be faithful. So you do the right thing and let the chips fall where they may. That's up to divine providence. The book that I spent the most time, blood, sweat, and tears on was a novel, which took me 20 years to finish. I usually finish a book in a couple of months. I remember saying to my friend Tom Howard, who was an absolutely brilliant writer, he died a few days ago, a friend of mine. I remember saying to Tom, you said once that you write rare books because very few people read them, but I think they're masterpieces. He said, well, I'm still waiting to get a letter. I get letters from people who read my books for all over the world and say, thank you for the book. It meant a lot to me, and that means a lot to me too. He said, but I still am waiting to get a letter from a sheep farmer in New Zealand. Well, I got a letter from a sheep farmer in New Zealand who liked my novel. That made my day.
So to wrap up, I really wanted to ask you about C.S. Lewis and your study of him and his impact on you. I think it's interesting because of his life and his long academic life, and I do see parallels in your life and career. What were your observations of him, and what did you learn from him? And was he one of those mentors?
He was probably the number one mentor among all modern writers. I think he's a genius. He's a brilliant writer. He makes everything clear. Everything he touches turns to gold. I got into Lewis by a providential so-called coincidence. My friend, who was a few years ahead of me at Calvin College, worked for Erdman's publishing company. And before I had even published anything at all, even articles, he phoned me saying, would you like to write a book for us? I said, why? He said, well, we're writing a series of books on contemporary writers in Christian perspective. Pick a writer and write a little introductory book, about 50 pages or so. I will publish it. I know you, you're a good writer. I said, thanks very much. I picked J.R.R. Tolkien because I thought The Lord of the Rings was the greatest book of the 20th century. A few days later, before he sent me a contract, I got another phone call and said, Peter, this is very embarrassing. Pick another writer rather than Tolkien. I said, why? Well, we just got a letter from W.H. Auden, who's perhaps the greatest living poet, and he wants to write a book for us on Tolkien. And you're not as famous as he is yet. So could you pick somebody else for now? And I said, well, the only other writer I admire as much as Tolkien is C.S. Lewis, but I know he's written about 30 or 40 books, and I've only read maybe half a dozen of them. I need a whole year to read everything Lewis had written, but I'd love to do that. I love Lewis. He said, fine, take as much time as you want. So I got into Lewis and I read everything he wrote, and he was my mentor. Meanwhile, Tolkien, who was still alive, got wind of the fact that Auden was going to write a book about him and wrote a very nasty letter to Auden saying, why can't you wait until my bones are in the grave before you kick them around? So he backed out.
So you spend a year reading all of his books. And what was your first book on Lewis called?
First book I ever read by Lewis was The Problem of Pain.
No, the first book you wrote on him for that publisher.
Oh, the first book I wrote was my book on Lewis, called C.S. Lewis in Christian Perspective. I think it's out of print now. But the first book I read by Lewis was The Problem of Pain, which is a difficult book. It's very tightly packed. It was the first book I ever read that I didn't fully understand, and I knew the fault was all on my part, not the writer's part. There are some books that are just muddled and confused and too technical, but I perceived that this was a totally clear mind, and I didn't have a totally clear mind. So I had to read it again. And finally, the third reading, I got everything clear.
So Lewis was he dead by the time you started reading on him?
Not quite. I never met him. Never got a letter from him. My friend Tom Howard met him. A number of people met him. John Paul II met, no, he didn't meet Lewis. I'm sorry. He met Walter Hooper, who was Lewis's close friend, and Hooper took care of Lewis's estate after he died and took care of Lewis himself in the years before he died. And John Paul asked Walter Hooper to come to the Vatican and talk to him about C.S. Lewis, because Lewis was one of John Paul's favorite writers. And Hooper said that we had a conversation that lasted many hours, and it was a deep and gratifying conversation. We both loved Lewis so much. And that I asked the Holy Father to please give me a blessing and pray for me at the end. So he put his hands on my shoulders and he prayed. And I felt something that I thought I could not endure. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was being crushed. And I looked up into John Paul's eyes, and there was the weight of the world in his eyes. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that would happen." He took his hands away.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So,
by the way, Lewis did know a saint, a living saint. The Latin letters of C.S. Lewis are ongoing communication between Lewis, who was a Church of England Protestant, and a Catholic priest in Italy, Dom Giovanni Calabria, who was since canonized. And they're about ecumenism, actually about Protestant-Catholic relationship, a model of ecumenism on both sides.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, we've run out of time for today. It's always that time thing, Peter. I wanted to thank you so much for making the time to all the way across the other side of the world. With our show, we've got about 8,000 private business owners as clients in our accounting businesses, and we try to bring them information that we think can help them be healthier, wealthier, and wiser, because there's no point having a lot of material success if you don't have a better context to live a good life with all of that. And so I try to reach out to people that I think can prompt people to think and look for good answers to life's immutable questions. And I'm sure you're one of those people. So I so much want to thank you for all of your hard work, your writing, and inspiration that's reached all around the world and all the way here to Sydney.
Well, thank you for your thank you. I wouldn't have taken a plane to Australia. That's too exhausting, but this was nothing but fun.
Absolutely. And I'd love to do it again. I really enjoyed our time together, Peter. Thank you so much.
So would I. I'm sure both of us have a lot more to say.
Absolutely. I'd love to do a part 2.
You've got it.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.